Hello and welcome. This is Lights Out, and away we go with the episode. We're the Formula One podcast for fans, by fans. I'm Will, and as I look across the digital garage, as always, I'm joined by my co-host, or shall I say my co-driver, Sam. Hi, Sam. How are you?
Hello, Will. Hello, listeners. I'm very well, thank you. Had a very nice weekend. It was quite quiet, actually. I didn't have loads of plans over this bank holiday, so I managed to watch a lot of racing cars going around. I saw quite a bit of free practice on Friday during my lunch break. I watched the practice session and the qualifying on Saturday, the race Sunday, and then obviously the Indy 500 Sunday night as well. So yeah, I feel like I've had my racing itch has been scratched this weekend. How was yours?
Very good. I mean, I've had my racing itch scratched, but not in the form of four-wheel racing, but in two-wheel racing. My dad and brother took part in Ride London, the 100-mile bike ride through London and Essex. They were representing Osprey Team Racing, so they had their special jerseys on for that. And yeah, that was good to see them, but I obviously missed some of the Formula 1 race as well. But no, that was good. Good to see that.
How are they feeling after it?
Yeah, pretty good actually. The legs aren't too achy, which is good. So I mean, it was like 5 and 6 hours on the bike. So yeah, not for me, but well done to them for a strong effort. And I should say, you and I were together on Friday night with some of our mutual friends, and we have to say the question from last week's podcast on who would be your, the boyfriend, who would you pick for your boyfriend? Our female friends in our group particularly enjoyed that question. They were discussing it for themselves as well. And let's just say George Russell was a very popular choice that evening. But also it's been another big week for us in Lights Out. We reached 1,000 downloads this week, so amazing achievement. Thank you so much to all of you for your support. We really, really appreciate it. It means the world for us. We are having so much fun doing this podcast, and this is very much only the start of the journey. So thank you very much for supporting us, and yeah, let's see what the future brings. But yeah, amazing to have reached 1,000 downloads. And this weekend, as you said, Sam, we had some Formula 1 racing. We had the Monaco Grand Prix. Who won the race, and what did you make of it?
Well, the best driver in the fastest car won the race, but it was a very good race. I was a bit worried about Monaco. I think, as you'll recall, in our last episode, I jokingly said at the end, "How many overtakes do you think we'll see?" And we actually saw a few. And the racing was pretty good. So yeah, never mind it being a good race for a Monaco Grand Prix. I think it was just a good race, full stop. So yeah, very welcome.
Yeah.
What did you make of it?
Yeah, me too. I think the rain really helped with this race. Just, a lot of the action happened in the second half, and the rain really, I think, did sort of mix things up, and it did really test the drivers, which is what you want to see. Really, you don't want it just to be about the machinery. You want to see driver skill. And I think some drivers really showed off their skill, whereas others, I think, really struggled. And I do think it's a great sight seeing the cars go around Monaco in the rain and sort of how pressure, especially when they don't have enough grip, how they've got to sort of balance it. And it makes you think back to Ayrton Senna. He was always very good. And so, as you did say, the fastest car with the fastest driver is when he did sound a bit less enthusiastic than previous. Maybe is this starting to get to you a little bit? But how was Max's performance this weekend?
He was unreal, Will. He was brilliant. There's a long-held debate, isn't there, amongst F1 fans, and also something you and I have discussed with some of our aforementioned mutual friends who are kind of sports fans, but not really into Formula One, where the perception is that it's all about the car. And I sort of subscribe to the view that a lot of it is the car. I don't know what the split is, 80-20, 90-10, whatever. A lot of it is about the car, and there's no doubt Red Bull and Adrian Newey have done an amazing job this year and built a brilliant car that is significantly faster than everybody else. However, there are days and there are circuits where that 10% or that 20% or whatever proportion of the kind of overall package the driver makes up comes good, and it's all about them. And this was one of those weekends. Monaco is a real leveler of cars, as we saw in the race and in previous years as well, because of the nature of the circuit and what it demands of the driver. That's a race in which the drivers really earn their money, and that's why Ayrton Senna, one of the many reasons he's so revered. Like, he won there 5 times, often in much slower cars than his opponents were in. And basically it just relies on skill and bravery, and Max has a lot in equal measure. And yeah, he put in an absolutely unbelievable qualifying lap. The qualifying was probably one of the best qualifying sessions I've seen for a long time. I don't know if I want to go full Sky Sports F1 and say it's the best qualifying session ever. But it was a very good one, and the battle particularly between Alonso and Verstappen, and Ocon sliding in there in third with a brilliant lap himself. It was really exciting. And as soon as Alonso got provisional pole, I saw the lap time and was like, well, that's that then. Like, no, there's no way that gets beaten. Verstappen was down after the first two sectors as well, had to find sort of 2.5, 3/10. And then I don't know what he did in the final sector, but he just threw the car into a series of corners that it's really, really dangerous to do. Like the bravery it takes to do that. And I think he bounced off like two walls, glanced a couple on the way. You know, that's another comment as well. The cars are clearly a bit stronger than they were in previous years. But just the way he threw the car into those corners and the lines he took to find that time, and go ahead and basically take pole position as no one was expecting it, as he was halfway through the lap, was unbelievable. So, you know, I mean, you and I don't spend a lot of time talking about Max on this podcast because he wins every week, and you and I like to talk about the rest of the grid and keep it interesting. But this is very much one of those weekends where I think you just have to kind of take your hat off, really, and admire the brilliance that he has, really.
Yeah, very, very well put. I completely agree with you. I think of Max's wins so far this season, this is by far, not a contest, his best win. I think he really showed his class and his skill in qualifying and in the race. And I agree with you. You know, I was watching that qualifying session, and I also thought it was a brilliant qualifying session because it did feel like, you know, you couldn't call what was going to happen. There were so many good twists and turns through all three sessions. But I'm the same with you. In that that final sector of Monaco is the shortest sector of the three of that lap, and to be 2.5 tenths down basically with not many corners left to go, and then to find enough time not to just match but to be ahead was extraordinary. And the line he takes through the last corner, you're right, he touches the wall. I've never seen a Formula One car take that line so aggressively through that corner. And that's just genius at work to be able to find and to know where the limit is and to push it, you know, because you say if he misjudges that, the car's damaged. Whereas he knew he could get away with it, and to find that gap and to find that bit of time to make it up. Because I was the same as you. I thought, Alonso's got this in the bag, and then next thing you know, he's pulled some time out of nowhere. I agree with you. I took my hat off as well to him. And with the race, I think you're right. He was class, clear pedigree, championship sort of driver, really. Very masterful, in control, didn't make any mistakes in the wet. He struggled at Monaco in the past. He just seems a different driver to the guy that was sort of pushing too hard and sort of getting caught up in the barriers. And I think for Red Bull, that's exactly the performance they need him to put in. They've delivered such an amazing car, and he really capitalized on that car and added something extra to it. And that, you know, it was a championship winning drive, I think. And I've said that, I called it ages ago, but it's going to take something so bizarre for him not to be the world champion. I just think he's in such good form. He's at one with the car, and he's just so dominant, which is what you need to do as a world champion. You need to be, you can't just turn up and just expect to win. He's doing things that his teammate is not doing, and he's showing his talent to the absolute limit, and that's why he's leading the world championship, and he's going to probably become a third-time world champion pretty quickly this season.
Yeah, it's a cheap comparison, but it's the kind of race I remember Lewis putting in on a semi-regular basis when Mercedes were in their pomp, like just absolutely masterful. Like got away, built a nice gap to Alonso. He put 25 seconds on Alonso and put 2 laps on his own teammate in a race that's pretty short. You know, it's
55 laps on medium tires, which is unreal.
Yeah, just an amazing weekend for him, and just really underlined his dominance. I think, it's going to be, and for anybody to even come close to beating him this year in a race, the championship. I mean, I don't know. It feels very early calling it after 5 races, but it's over, isn't it? I mean, there's just no way anybody's gonna catch him. He's going to win the majority of races for the rest of the year, and rightly so. But yeah, this weekend really did just underline his kind of mastery of the sport he has at the moment. He's in his absolute peak, isn't he?
Yeah, and I think, go back to the point you made, like, we've not really given Max much time on this podcast so far, and that's part because there's not been much to really analyze and sort of discuss, really, because he's just been so dominant. He's put the car on pole, or he's cut through the field, and that's it. And we've talked through those moments, but this was a performance that deserves to be spoken about and to be focused on. And we're not his number one fans. I think it's quite clear who our loyalties lie with. But I still think we could really appreciate real talent on show. It's not like he was sort of just jamming. He was really, really good. And as I alluded to, he had the weekend his teammate would be dreaming of. And Sergio Perez, Checo, had an absolute shocker. And I'm gonna get in there nice and early. I'm gonna give my Latifi, which is for those that are new to the podcast, is our awards that we give to drivers or people involved throughout the Formula One weekend that have an absolute shocker, that just calamitous or make errors, and just have an absolute mare. And for me, Sergio had an absolute shocker across the weekend in qualifying. Really, really poor mistake to take too much speed going into the first corner. I think Martin Brundle seemed to think he got distracted by a car coming out the pit lane. That's why he misjudges the first corner, and then writes off the car basically. So he's out of the rest of qualifying in qualifying one to then end up back of the grid. And that's that for Red Bull. That's probably, and for anyone really, it's the worst circuit to have a bad qualifying, because it's so hard to overtake. And even in that Red Bull, we've said it's an absolute rocket, but that he really struggled to make up the places in the race. And then even in the race, he was making mistakes. He was crashing into people, bumping in all over the place. And, he was like a kid in a sweet shop. He just wanted to touch everything. He was sort of hitting other cars, hitting other people, hitting the barriers. I just think, a really, really poor weekend for Sergio. Not good for his reputation through putting in a performance like that. And, I think for the World Championship, as I said, one of the reasons why I've called it so early is because I just don't see Max ever having a weekend like that. And he's just gifted Max loads of points. It's not because of Checo got comp stuff. It was mistakes that Checo made throughout the weekend that has then gifted Max a 39-point difference after 6 races, which is just crazy. And what was interesting, I saw this earlier, that apparently this time last season, Charles Leclerc had a 40-point lead over Max at this point in the championship, and everyone was saying, "Oh, we've got a real battle on here." Whereas everyone's basically now resigned to the fact that Max has won, because Checo just doesn't have it in him. He's not got the talent and not at that level to be able to match that. And I think, if this becomes a pattern, if he has weekends like this more regularly, if the pressure still seems to get to him, and it becomes embarrassing, Red Bull will be ruthless. I mean, maybe they might be, if you can just do enough to keep up the car on the road and still score podiums. I think they'll keep him. But if he has calamitous weekends like this weekend, Red Bull won't be afraid to drop him come the end of the season, because it just becomes a PR disaster for them. And I was thinking about Sergio, and someone from recent Formula One history sort of came to mind. I feel like he is he's very similar to Felipe Massa, who was Hamilton's sort of title rival for a couple of years. And Massa was a quick driver that was winning races, was in sort of the World Championship battle, but never really, apart from 2008, wasn't really a World Championship sort of contender really, and was always just in a quick car, but never quite good enough to be a world champion. I think that's sort of the path that, and sort of the talent level that Sergio Perez is on. But yeah, what did you make of Sergio's performance this weekend?
Yeah, really bad one for him. Crashing the fastest car on the grid in Q1 was pretty unforgivable, really, particularly at Monaco. I mean, it would be pretty bad at any circuit, but at Monaco, as you said, there's nowhere worse to do it. And yeah, you didn't have to push that hard. I mean, it's an absolute doddle to get that car out of Q1. I mean, I just don't understand what he was doing. So yeah, that was a really poor mistake. And then obviously, you compromised the whole race, and he had a pretty poor race in general. I actually think this is a pattern. I mean, I don't want to sound like Nostradamus, but we did discuss this a bit when he won in Baku, and is this going to be a title challenge? And I do remember saying we had this last year where he won a couple of races and it looked like it might be quite a close battle with Max, and then inevitably Checo unfortunately has a shocker in him waiting to happen, and this weekend was his shocker. And as unfortunately, it feels like this is pretty inevitable now. Like he will win more races this year, Checo, maybe 1 or 2. Maybe 3, I don't know. He'll pick up a few. But there'll be weekends like this one where he finishes outside the points and Max goes and wins a race, and that 25-point swing opens a huge gap. And Max is never going to finish outside the top 3 this year, I don't think. Short of a serious DNF, it's just not going to happen. So yeah, just really poor. You can't come away from any race with 0 points in that car. And yeah, it's kind of criminal, really. The gap he's now fallen behind Max. I actually think this is kind of an ideal scenario for Red Bull. I think there was a discussion earlier this year, wasn't there, where Checo had won a couple races, Max had won a couple, and there was, it was looking like we were going to get an interesting battle. And I think the reason Horner was so relaxed about it is because he knows this as well. Like he knows his drivers. He knows Checo's going to at some point have a weekend like he's had this weekend, and it's not really a problem, right? That Max is the number one driver. It kind of removes the need for an argument.
Yeah.
Now, and we all come to Mercedes, and I know we're both fans of Mercedes. Sorry, listeners, you're going to have to listen to us talk about Mercedes later. But those two drivers are much more closely matched. Like, it's a much bigger problem for them to try and manage those two drivers. Whereas Red Bull know Checo's not going to be a challenge for Max long term. As long as they earn enough points to win the constructors, which they will, Checo's going to keep his seat. I'm convinced of that. I mean, unless Checo starts being in the car on a weekly basis, and Aston Martin or Mercedes start catching up in the constructors, again, that feels quite unlikely too. He's not going to lose his seat, and he's going to end up serving as the perfect foil for Max for the rest of the season, and probably for the rest of his time at Red Bull. It's just a bit of a shame because after Baku, and it was quite close to Miami. I mean, he had the lead, and Max caught him up and probably did demonstrate his superiority over the course of that weekend. But he still finished second, got good points. It still feels like a bit of a battle, but now it's hard to envisage anything other than Max kind of schooling him for the rest of the year, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about sort of the team management thing, because everyone, like you say, was sort of the big question was what were Red Bull going to do? Were they going to prioritize one or the other? And I think you're right. Christian Horner must be like, well, this is just exactly what I wanted to happen. Checo sort of taking himself out of the World Championship battle, so I don't have to worry about managing these two drivers going up against each other. And then like we've sewn up the constructors again, lovely stuff.
Yep.
And the headache has gone away basically. Whereas if you think back to inter-teammate rivalry, Hamilton versus Rosberg, they matched each other that season, and that was a one-off season that Rosberg could get to that level, and that they had to manage it. Whereas I think you're right, Horner's probably very happy at how things are at the moment, because it's his number one driver is going to win the world championships uncontested basically, and that's keeps him happy, keeps the team happy, and they get the accolades they deserve really. It's going to be interesting. To see. I think you're right. It's one to watch Checo, see how he goes on for the rest of the season. I think you're right. If he did start binning the car more, we could be talking about a Mr. Daniel Ricciardo returning. But let's not get carried away, because that's still a long way off, and things would have to really transpire to see Mr. Ricciardo smiling his way back into the Red Bull seat. I feel like we've covered off Red Bull pretty well. Just one final point I'll make on Red Bull, that. Even if Checo won the next 5 races and Max finished second, Max would still be leading the championship. So, crazy.
Wasn't there was? I thought that I can't. I'm really annoyed. I'm not going to remember the exact statistic because it's really good. But there was something about Max Verstappen not finishing outside the top 10 when his cars finished the race for like 8 years or something. There was some amazing stuff. I'll see if I can find it out and we'll cover it in another episode. But I remember seeing it on Twitter recently, and just the consistency of the guy is incredible. Good luck to everyone else, right?
Talking of consistency,
yes,
Mr. Fernando Alonso, another podium. What a great weekend for him. I think we can say now after 6 races that Aston Martin is the second best car on the grid. I think Ferrari, Mercedes, Alpine aren't quite consistent enough to be considered the closest challenger to Red Bull, whereas I think Aston and Alonso, which we'll come on to, has done enough to make and has shown that car is the second. But also, I think for Alonso, he had a really good weekend, and he in another world, he could have, if things had gone another way, he could have very easily won the race.
He really could. Yeah. He had a brilliant weekend, Alonso. I think you can tell. You can tell he's happy with it, but you can also tell he knows there's a tinge of regret. This is the one that he's been talking about all season as the one that he thinks he could win. The same goes for Aston. All the pundits were really excited a bit about it. I mean, the Alonso hype wagon was unbelievable the last week or so on Sky and the rest of it. Everybody was thinking it was going to be a Fernando's 33rd win in Formula One. It didn't quite work out that way. As we've talked about, Max put in an unbelievable third sector and nicked pole off of him. And generally speaking, in Monaco, if you put the car on pole, you're probably odds on to win it, as was the case. And then in the race, I think the strategy calls Aston made were pretty poor, actually. the thing that got me is, so they pitted Alonso before the rain came to change his tyres, and in an ordinary situation, I have some sympathy for that. And if they had a close gap and they were trying to cover off a rival, be it Ocon or whoever else was in third, fine. But they had such a big gap on Ocon, they could have afforded to wait a few more laps. And he was on the hard tyres as well, so it's not like he was doing what Max was doing and sort of skating around on medium tyres trying to protect them carefully. He was on the hard tyre. He could have cracked on for much longer if he wanted to. And if they'd just been patient and just waited a few more laps and just thought to themselves, oh, we've got 20, 25 seconds on third place. Even if we get this wrong, we've got a whole pit stop in the pocket. We'll still finish second. They just waited a little bit, waited for the right moment, switched to Inter straight away. It's possible Alonso could have got ahead of Max at those pit stops. It's not a guarantee, but it could have happened. But that was kind of out the window as soon as Alonso came in for his tyres. And I think even the commentators were a bit surprised because it was just starting to rain. It didn't look like it was really heavy. They brought him in, and then literally one lap later, the heavens opened on half the circuit, and it became kind of they needed to put intermediate tyres on straight away. So yeah, it was it's a shame we didn't get to see something a bit closer potentially. But he had a brilliant weekend. He was really quick in all the practices, and then put in an absolutely stunning lap in qualifying, only beaten by one of the best drivers. Yeah. It's one of the quickest drivers ever, and certainly one of the best in Formula 1 at the moment. So is at the absolute peak of his game. I think, as you say, on another day, Alonso picks up his 33rd win and everyone goes home happy. But not to be this weekend, but still a brilliant weekend for him.
Yeah, I think as well. Like, there's a really good Twitter account that sort of does a lot of sort of like, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'll remember it for another time. But they do quite a lot of analysis of the data from the Formula 1 weekends, and they basically calculated that if Alonso had put intermediates on at that point, he would have won the race, because the time, because Max, it took Max a while, I think, to pit, and Max was sort of skating around in the wet on sort of slick tires for a period. I think if Alonso had pitted when he did pit and put the intermediates on, he would have overtaken. They've calculated he would have probably, with this time he made up, would have won the race. And I think you're right. I think he's getting closer, and he looks like he's getting more closer. I know it was 20 something seconds that they ended up finishing apart. And I did also see that Alonso is trying to manifest his first place win by celebrating the podium by putting his foot on the top step for the photographs. And we've alluded to this before, but it would be quite something if in Spain this weekend he was at his home race, if he did win his 33rd race. And I did see that the garage that he's in for the weekend is number 33, which is quite funny. So if you believe in omens and such like, let's that could be quite an interesting thing to see him. But yeah, I think he had a strong weekend as well. And for Aston Martin as well, that's exactly what they needed from him. He's taken that car and maximized it. He's got, there's no race, I don't think, so far. He's not finished anywhere but third, or lower than third. He's got that car, the best of the rest, basically. And he's capitalizing opportunities when Sergio has a bad weekend and he's right there taking second. And he'll be annoyed that he didn't get first. And I wonder if we'll get to the end of the season, we'll be like, that was the race and that was the moment, that pit stop, that was the race and the moment where Red Bull would have lost a race. Hard to know what the rest of the season's got in store for us, but I think with the dominance of what we're seeing for Red Bull, we're predicting they're going to go on and win every race, bar a miracle, and that was the opportunity I think they had. So let's hope that's not the one opportunity that someone else could have won a race, but we'll have to wait to see. And like I said, he delivered everything for Aston Martin, what they want from him. He's that star driver that is maximising the car and showing that class. And he was class in the rain as well. His teammate, Lance Stroll, son of Lawrence, the owner, just embarrassing. I'm sorry, but it's just embarrassing. It's embarrassing for him. It's embarrassing for his dad. It's embarrassing for the team. And it's kind of embarrassing for the sport to have someone in the second quickest car so far off your teammate. Like, he didn't get into Q3. And then in the race, he was crashing into people, having a bit of chocolate. I think, when he goes for, is it Logan Sargent in the very start? He goes for a gap about half the size of a Formula 1 car. And it's just like, what on earth are you doing? Are you trying to play the Formula 1 game here, where you're just trying to cut in any corner you can? I just think it's embarrassing, really. And I think, I'd be intrigued to know, because I saw in the constructors standings that Aston Martin are only a point ahead of Mercedes, and that's because Lewis and George are scoring high regularly. They're not obviously getting podiums every weekend, but obviously two drivers scoring well every weekend is really helping them with constructors. And there is a genuine threat that Mercedes could finish the season second, despite not having the second quickest car. And at what point does Lawrence Stroll, the owner, decide actually the team and the money they'll get from being, second in the constructors, which is a lot, the difference in prize winning at the end of the season. At what point does he decide to prioritize that over his son's sort of career? I mean, if he did get rid of his son, it would be pretty damaging. It'd be career ending, and he would never be able to sort of show his face again. And it would probably be pretty brutal to sack your own son. But on merit, and if taking out the surname, if you looked at that performance of a driver, it's pretty shocking. What did you make of Lance Stroll's performance this weekend?
Yeah, it looked like someone driving Monaco for the first time in their life. Embarrassing is probably the right word, actually. I mean, it feels a bit harsh, but I think you're probably right. It was. The second fastest car on the grid, can't even get it out of Q2. So qualifies poorly, compromises the race, and then spends a lot of the race basically driving into competitors. And as you say, that move he tried to put in on who was it? He was trying to get past Raul Miraboni.
Logan Sargent.
That's right. Yeah, and also, by the way, mention for Kevin Magnussen's move on Logan Sargent, where he absolutely sent it, and that is how you make an overtake at Monaco. Lance, if you're watching, listening, you won't be, but if you should be, and have a chat with Kevin about making moves in Monaco. That was really bad, and he just had a really poor race. And then when it rained, I don't know. I mean, there's some chat about him potentially having a braking problem, but he was basically bobsleighing around Monaco, like hitting every single wall. It was it was really, really poor. And I'm calling it now. Mercedes are going to finish second in the championship. I don't think Aston Martin are going to. They're not. No. They can't with that driver lineup. They won't. Lance will have other weekends like this, and Lewis and George will not. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
And also, I'm also quietly confident that Mercedes' kind of development and stuff over the course of the season will see them pick up speed and more points than Aston Martin. But really poor. And he's so far off his teammate. I mean, we talked about absolutely lauded Alonso for his performance, brilliant qualifying, brilliant Grand Prix, yet more points, another podium. Feels like a win is definitely possible. And Lance, terrible. I do wonder how long they can persist with it. I think they'll probably stick with it this season, but as they become a bigger team, and that is their hope, right? They've got a new wind tunnel opening later this year. They're going to move. They've signed a new factory. They've signed a big deal with Honda for 2026. There is no way they can be carrying the boss's son in 2026 with a car that they know they should be challenging for a championship with. That's their aim, right? That is their stated goal. How are you going to do that with a guy who's driving around Monaco like it's a bobsleigh run? It's just surely not. And I should say, so you've already awarded your Latifi. I'm awarding mine to Lance Stroll. Terrible weekend. We've talked about all the reasons why. An honourable mention for the recovery crew who work at Monaco for revealing to the world the secrets of Red Bull and Mercedes underfloors of their cars. So if you missed it, bear in mind we are now in a ground effect era where the most important component on a Formula One car is the floor. The floors of those cars are widely kept secrets. Even when they're changing them in the paddock, they hide them in the trucks. Like people aren't allowed to see them. And basically, Lewis and Checo both had incidents during pre-practice. And on both occasions, they used cranes to remove the cars and lifted them up. And there's lots of lovely photos taken of the undersides of both cars. And I'm sure every aerodynamicist working in Formula One is stewing over them this week to try and figure out what they can try and do. They are amazing, actually, amazing things to look at. But I remember, Toto and Christian Horner were both fuming about that. So honourable mention for them. But Latifi gets it for having a really shocking weekend. Particularly,
Stroll gets a Latifi, not Latifi.
No, not Latifi. Stroll gets a Latifi for having a shocking weekend, certainly in the context of what his teammate managed to pull off.
It'd be like Newcastle United, Eddie Howe, if he has a son, signing his son, saying, "Yeah, I'm going to put my son centre forward, and we're going to win the Premier League with my son centre forward alongside, Alexander Isaac, no one else in sport would put someone like, just put their own family member in and say, yeah, we're going to win everything. And when they're obviously, if Stroll was amazing, was a real talent, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But it's, ridiculous and crazy.
The problem for them to some extent is it's not like Lance is a total novice. Like, he can drive a Formula One car, and on some days he can drive a Formula One car quite well. Like, we've seen him this season put in relatively good performances and finish in the top 10 and collect points and stuff. But the problem is Formula One is such a competitive sport, and we talked about this on other episodes. There are a huge number of really talented drivers either on the grid or waiting to get seats in Formula One. And the longer this kind of goes on, the louder the shouts are going to be for some of those talented drivers to get better drives. Because I'm of the opinion, if Aston Martin wanted to go out and get a Piastri or something like that, they could do that reasonably. They could do that, particularly with their plans in place for 2026. But as it stands at the moment, keeping Lance in there, and there's a possibility they miss out on the availability of talent over the next few years. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're starting to think about it. But who knows? As you say, getting rid of the boss's son, yikes! We won't want to make that call.
No, but also what's quite strange is it probably moves something about the culture of Aston Martin is that when Otmar Safnauer left as the team principal, he was sort of said, I didn't like the pressure I was being put under, and Lawrence Stroll was so demanding. And so if there is that pressure to be so successful, you can't then have one of the drivers be like, well, he's my son, so he gets a lovely weekend off and he can do whatever he like because he's my son. Like, it's not a jolly, weekend out for him. It's not a hobby. It's a career, and it's other people's careers as well. And it's being bankrolled by his dad, but it's just, I find part of me really loves Aston Martin. I think such a brilliant project and what they're going to do and where they're going to go. And with the announcement last week of them signing Honda, I'm like, oh, this is going to be so exciting if they can get to the front of the grid with their sort of 5-year plan. Amazing. But then they kind of I lose sort of any sort of sympathy or support for them when I go, well, but then they've just got the sons, the owner's son in one of the best seats at the moment, and he's just a bit of a clown. He's a bit embarrassing. It's like, really, it's hard to support a team or really take them seriously when they have something so ridiculous as that.
Yep, agreed.
I could have easily given Latifi to him, so we could have had our first ever joint Latifi winner, but alas. We should touch on Alpine. A very good weekend for Esteban Ocon. A brilliant qualifying session. Put him third on the grid, very unexpectedly. Don't think anyone saw that. It was sort of a lap out of nowhere. We covered him in a lot of detail last weekend in last week's episode, 2 weeks episode about the most underrated drivers. Good to see he's lived up to your prediction of being underrated. I think he's got quite a lot of recognition for his performance this weekend. But fair play to me, he kept the car in third and saw off challenges from those behind him as well. A great weekend for Esteban Ocon.
Yeah, really good. We set him up for it, clearly, talking about him so much on the pod.
We did.
He
was listening to your words of encouragement beforehand. That's what he had in his pre-race headphones.
I wish I had that kind of influence, Will. No, he had a brilliant weekend, really good. There are just some drivers, I think, that just when they get into the zone and they're in a competitive car, they suddenly really overperform, and I think that was one of those weekends for Ocon. Like, I don't think he's not a Max Verstappen kind of person, but he's a really good driver, Esteban Ocon, and he got the car into a really great place this weekend. Looked really quick all through practice, and then put in a stunning lap in qualifying. It looked like it was going to be pole for about 30 seconds, and that would have been amazing. But really good, and to keep third place, and we talked about those changeable conditions. I mean, big shout to Alpine as well. I mean, they've been under quite a lot of pressure from no one other than their own owner over the last few weeks. So they put in a really good performance as well. I think they managed the strategy well, got Gasly into some really good points too, collected good points for the team overall, and picked up a nice podium. So it's not easy driving third in a car that's probably a bit slower than the ones behind you, particularly when the one directly behind you is driven by Lewis Hamilton. Ocon did a brilliant job, but Alpine in general did a great job. It feels like they've turned a bit of a corner. I think they've had a couple of good strong weekends now, picked up lots of points, starting to hit that consistency that we've come to expect from them the last few years, and they're definitely in the conversation. I mean, if we think Aston Martin are the second quickest team, and they probably are for the moment, where sort of Mercedes and Ferrari are, I don't think Alpine are too far out that conversation now. I mean, we'll see. I think next weekend's a really big weekend for us in terms of really seeing what the gaps are between some of those teams, because Barcelona is a really interesting circuit that shows or is a good testing ground to demonstrate the true pace of a car. And we'll find out quite quickly how close they are. But at the moment, it seems like they're a bit closer than perhaps we thought they would be. So, and that's only a good thing for competitiveness of Formula One. So yeah, good for Alpine, good for the French drivers, and yeah, Ocon was very, very happy up on the podium, wasn't he? So hope we get to see a bit more of that.
Yeah, I mean, just two thoughts before we go to the break. One is I saw their team celebrations afterwards, and Pierre Gasly was having a very, very forced smile. Did not look overly happy for the team's sort of success, which fits in with our sort of narrative of we think they're going to be they're going to come to blows at some point this season. So that should be really interesting. But also, the second point I was going to make for Alpine, they must be looking at Ferrari and think we can take Ferrari in this constructors championship, because Ferrari when we'll come on to this in the second half, Ferrari are throwing points away and just making mistake after mistake, and they're there for the taking. Really, they could very much end the season as the fifth in constructors, which would be an absolute disaster. But Alpine, they'll be very happy to get a podium with the opportunity when they had one, and I'm sure they'll be looking at the constructors around them to sort of see who they can pick off as the season progresses.
Definitely.
And with that, we'll take a quick break. Welcome back from the break. Hope you had a jolly old time. We had a very jolly old time here. One big topic of conversation from this weekend was the upgrades that Mercedes brought. Now, with the cancellation of Imola, where we thought we were going to see them then, Mercedes took the bold decision to bring them to Monaco rather than wait to Barcelona, which is what a lot of the other teams have decided to do. And we did see those big changes from Mercedes. The no side pods have now been made into side pods, which is what we thought this was coming. We thought they basically accepted after those first few races that the principle of having no side pods had failed. Now, that wasn't the only change that Mercedes brought this weekend. Sam, as the more technical minded and more technically interested, I wondered if you could give us a breakdown of the changes that Mercedes have made, and wouldn't say put it in layman's terms, but just what should we look for, and what should we see from this new Mercedes car in sort of simpler, rather than sort of getting lost in really technical analysis which people can find elsewhere.
Okay, I'll do my best. It's marginal, I would say. The gap in technical knowledge between us is very small, but I'll have a go. So the side pods are clearly the most noticeable change they've made. Formerly, Mercedes were going for a kind of quite a slim, narrow, low drag approach to building a Formula One car, and that's why they had the so-called zero pods design in place, and they had a lot of exposed floor, but that presented significant problems last season. Firstly, porpoising, which is an aerodynamic problem with the car, where the front rises and basically the car stalls and it causes it to bounce. And then to stop that happening, they had to make the car really stiff, and that resulted in the car just bouncing over the bumps on Formula One circuits, of which there are 22, and a significant number of them have quite bumpy surfaces to them. So Mercedes persisted with that design, sort of solved all the bouncing problems, and then unfortunately found this year that it was very, very limited. The ceiling for that design was quite low, and Red Bull were absolutely battering them, as they're battering everybody. But from a Mercedes perspective, considering the kind of high quality they have, let's say from an engineering perspective, it was a bit of a surprise that they persisted with that approach and found themselves almost a second a lap slower than their main rivals. So they've obviously completely changed direction. Now, to some extent, they're a bit limited because there's a cost cap in place. They don't have the money available to them to just basically build a B-spec car completely new from scratch. So they've had to sort of go in a slightly different direction of approach without totally rebuilding the car, which is obviously a job for 2024. But what they have done is quite interesting, and it's a really big change in philosophy. So rather than that quite skinny profile, they've moved to a slightly bigger kind of outwash style, where basically they're trying to move air rather than directly under the car. They're trying to move air around the car and focus it right back down towards the rear end, to try and plant the rear end of the car in a kind of more traditional design for a Formula One car. So if you look at a Formula One car, basically in any generation for the past 30 years, you'll see big fat side pods that are basically there to force the air away from the car and over back down towards the rear wing and away from the rear wheels. And they've moved to that kind of aerodynamic philosophy. That's the side pod bit. They've obviously changed the floor as well. Now, the complexity of the floor, as we've seen from those rogue photos that have been taken because the cars were lifted up by the crane, as we mentioned in the first half of the pod, because they're so complex, it's quite difficult to really get under the skin of what the changes are. But in essence, it looks like they've just basically tried to simplify it and to try and essentially try and Coke bottle the air through the middle section of the floor back towards the rear wing and try and, again, it's all about planting the rear end for better grip out of the corners. The biggest change, I actually think, isn't necessarily the side pods. It's actually the front suspension. So the biggest problem Mercedes had towards the back end of last year was because the porpoising problem they had to run the car really, really stiff. And that's why it struggled with bumps, which, as I've mentioned, there's a lot of them throughout the course of a Formula One season. So what they've changed on the front suspension is they've moved to a much more Red Bull kind of design. And basically, they've introduced quite a complex series of kind of steering rods and tracking rods and suspension. And what that does is it loosens up the front end a bit more and loosens up the rear end. So there are basically two ways to kind of stop the car from rising and falling at the front and at the back. So when a car brakes, naturally the nose dips, and equally when it accelerates, the nose rises. Now, one of the ingenious parts of the Red Bull design is they've got such good suspension in place, they can manage that without having to run the car very stiff. And that means they don't have a problem with the bumps. Now, Mercedes did have that problem. What they've done is they've moved to a more Red Bull model where basically they've negated the need to run the car so hard. And that is why Lewis Hamilton is so happy now, because he hated driving a really hard car that he couldn't throw into corners and over bumps for fear of breaking it. That's basically the change that they've made. That's the sort of general move away from the kind of narrow and stiff. Let's simplify even more. They've moved away from narrow and stiff, and they've moved towards fat and spongy, basically.
Nice.
That's the move. That. Yeah, but it seems to have worked. Lewis is happy anyway.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Does it look a quicker car? I mean, from my eye test, it looked a bit, as a layman, not really fully understanding the technical side. It looks a nicer looking car, and it looked a bit quicker. And like I say, the noises coming out of Lewis were much more positive. What's your sort of assessment? Do you think Mercedes are now on the right path? And also, my second point, you were previously touting the Black Bull. It's not quite the same as the Red Bull, and it's not the same as the Ferrari, which has been the two main design principles. What do you make of their sort of, again, new direction they've gone with, the sort of side pods?
Yeah, they've gone their own way, basically. The front suspension is very Red Bull, the kind of anti-dive aspects of it. The side pods, they're quite McLaren-ish, actually, the side pods. And the floor, I mean, who knows? I mean, that could be a bit Ferrari, we're not too sure. But yeah, no, it looks like they've gone kind of in their own direction. They've not gone to try and copy another rival, and that makes some sense, to be honest. Like if Mercedes had just copied the Red Bull, they wouldn't have got it right. First of all, they didn't have enough money to do it, even if they wanted to, but they wouldn't necessarily have got it as well, got it as done perfectly as Red Bull. And unfortunately, what it would mean is they were always behind in the development race as well, because that theory and that philosophy will just be further developed by, as we've alluded to, the best designer in Formula One history. Like that would be very difficult to close up their gaps. They almost have to go in a different direction, and it seems like they have. But the biggest change for me seems like it's a lot more drivable. It's a lot more pliable car. Like you can throw it around a bit more. And as we saw in Monaco, like Lewis did a really good job in qualifying and in the race and seemed quite happy with it. And I think that's a good change for them, I think. I mean, one of the best things they've got, one of their biggest assets, Mercedes, is they've got two really good drivers who are willing to take the car to the limit at any time, basically. And giving them a car that they both should have a bit more confidence in doing that with is probably sort of the direction they need to go in, rather than what seemed to me quite a dogmatic kind of numbers-oriented design that they went with the last couple of years. And despite their number one driver and 7-time world champion telling them he wasn't particularly happy with it, I feel like there are definitely times where you kind of need to trust the driver. And in this case, it seems like they have.
It'll be interesting to see how they get on with this new car, because if Lewis is happier, they may come. We don't know what the rest of the season's got in store. But if this car becomes a real threat and is can challenge the Aston for podiums regularly, they may really that may be the big moment of their seasons. Why on earth did they waste time and money and resources going for another season with no sidepod car? that could be really costly for the team. And let's hope they're on the right path. But I think we alluded to this in previous episodes. We saw this upgrade not only as important for the Mercedes' current season, but also we think for keeping Lewis at the team. And I think that's there was lots of rumors and stories of him going to Ferrari this weekend, which he's been very dismissive of, and Ferrari been very dismissive of as well. But I think he sounded very positive with the new car, and like you say, he seemed like he could make the car work. Whereas we said in Miami, he sounded pretty broken and pretty defeated by the car. Whereas he sounded quite up for it. And he didn't have an amazing qualifying, but he was still in the conversation of being near the top. Whereas George actually seemed really unhappy with the car. I think he probably just got used to the previous design and must be quite happy now having sort of to readjust. And I think it shows you sort of the talent and skill and the experience that they've got is that Lewis can drive anything really and still be respectful and get a good time out of it. Whereas George probably is still getting used to it and the different demands of driving quick cars and great cars. And he's obviously probably still coming to terms with a different style, whereas Lewis has probably got that experience he can call upon to adapt a bit quicker and easier to it.
Yeah, no, it's going to be really interesting to see how it goes. I think Barcelona, as I said earlier, it's a really good track for seeing a true car's capability, or a car's true capability, I should say. So yeah, we'll learn a lot, I think, next weekend about where Mercedes actually are. Yeah, George did seem a bit he was a bit prickly this weekend, I thought. He was quite grumpy after the first couple of practice sessions, like he wasn't really happy with the setup of the car. Started to get it into place for sort of the third practice session in his qualifying. Still was sort of soundly beaten by Lewis. And then yeah, he didn't have the best race, George. I mean, he was talking quite big afterwards about the prospect of getting a podium, but I don't know. I never really felt like he was in a conversation for a podium. Yeah, he drove over Checo's front wing, rejoining, got a penalty for that. Yeah, he didn't have a great weekend. I do get a sense that there's a little bit of needle there. I think he knows he's a fair chunk behind Lewis in the championship now from a points perspective, and he's clearly not very comfortable with that situation. And maybe there is something about the development of the car that is favouring Lewis over him. But I think that's probably fair enough. I mean, he joined a team with a 7-time world champion in it. That was he's basically that team. And they know they're trying to earn him an 8th. So I think to some extent that's kind of should be expected. But yeah, we'll learn a lot next weekend. I think that'll be a really good kind of acid test for those that change that Mercedes have made. And yeah, we'll see. I'm quite excited for it, actually. I mean, Barcelona is generally not actually the most exciting race on the calendar, but because of all the changes that all the teams are bringing, not just Mercedes, but you said already there'll be others bringing upgrades, and obviously Alpine bought quite a few this weekend that we'll get to see at Barcelona too. So yeah, it should be a good weekend for seeing what direction teams are going in.
Yeah, definitely. It was always an interesting thing to watch throughout the season, sort of the development race. We've not really seen many upgrades or big upgrades, and the Mercedes was the first big one. Just when you were looking now, I just had a look at the Drivers' Championship, and George is 19 points behind Lewis. So it's not insurmountable, but yeah, he probably will not enjoy being behind his teammate when he was ahead of him for most of last season. We've covered Mercedes. Now it's time to cover the Scuderia of Red, Ferrari. Yeah, this is not a positive conversation if you're a Ferrari fan. I'm sorry, but I feel like you will probably enjoy this conversation because we're probably speaking some home truths about the TFOC and the Red. Just again a poor weekend from Ferrari. Not because of the car or anything, but just because of just mistakes that the team are making. They're making bad strategy calls. The drivers are making mistakes. They were going into the weekend saying they thought they could challenge the win, and in qualifying they were never in the conversation. There was a bit of talk of, oh, is this going to be Leclerc? Is he going to get it on pole again? But actually, he wasn't. Didn't get in the top 3, and I don't they just never looked quick throughout qualifying at all. And then not Sergio, and then Carlos just had a pretty poor race. He was bumping into things, making mistakes as well. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, it just not a great weekend for Ferrari, and it doesn't help sort of their image of sort of very error prone and self-inflicting mistakes.
Yeah, some of the blunders are clown car, poor, really. So things you don't do at Monaco. Tell your lead driver about every other lap that's being driven on the circuit, and not warn him that Lando Norris is on a fast lap right behind him. Number one. Charles Leclerc then got a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Lando Norris in qualifying. And then, during the course of the race, I mean, the strategy call on Sainz looks worse and worse each time. Like Sainz was fuming in the car, and I think Sainz actually he's demonstrated previously that he's got a really good head for strategy. I know Monaco, funnily enough, last year he made a call against the team's wishes, didn't he? And turned out to be an absolute blinder, and had a really good race and sort of brought himself up the grid. Whereas if he'd followed the strategy of the team, he wouldn't have done. And I think it was another case of that this weekend. So they bitted him really early to try and cover off Hamilton. And Hamilton was never really a threat to Sainz. I think they should have carried on really and waited to bring him in, but they rushed and compromised Sainz. And he didn't have the best race. He's also looking a bit jaded. I think both drivers do actually. I mean,
they don't look happy, do they?
No, neither of them are happy. I mean, there are problems with the Ferrari, to be fair, mechanical ones this year. I mean, the car is relatively quick, but obviously nowhere near as quick as the Red Bull. They've made time up on last year, but nowhere near enough. And it's really hard on its tyres, and it's really stiff. And as I said earlier, Lewis and George have been driving a car that's been too stiff for a year and a half. They finally got themselves into a car that's not overly stiff, and lo and behold, one of them in particular is quite happy, and I think the other one will come around to it in due course. Ferrari have gone the other direction. They've got a really stiff car, and neither driver's really happy driving it. And they need to figure that out because they're in a similar situation. They've got two brilliant drivers, both really happy to drive the car to its limits, and neither are really confident to do it at the moment. So, there's a lot for poor old Fred Vasseur to try and sort out. But some of the blunders. I mean, that one in qualifying is just shocking. You don't see that even from like really poor teams in Formula One at the back of the grid. And then the strategy calls, they're just it's almost like every time they've got a 50-50, like it's like they flip a coin, 50-50 choice, and then instead of looking at the result on the coin, they just pick up a gun and shoot themselves in the foot. You're just like, surely at some point they're going to get one right, and it's very frustrating because I really want Ferrari to be back at the front and contending, but
Well, I was going to say last season, Ferrari being in the championship battle for us as as Mercedes fans, with Mercedes bumping around all over the place, it was something to get behind, and to see Ferrari, the most historic team within Formula One, be at the front and challenging for World Championship and seeing their drivers excel, and that was really exciting. But it must be just so frustrating for them now because how many, I can't think off the top of my head how many seasons Charles has been at Ferrari, but he's only ever really been in the conversation for the World Championship once. And I wonder he must be frustrated at the mistakes the team are making, but then the car not being good enough as well. It must be very hard for both of them to be at Ferrari, the greatest team in Formula One, and it just not be going to plan in it, and a lot of it be sort of self-inflicted. It must be quite hard to sort of turn up to work and be like, right, what we're going to do, what mistake are we going to make this weekend? And I'm certain if he has another weekend like it, Leclerc's engineer is getting sacked, because remember it was at Jeddah where he didn't tell Leclerc about when to push, so then Hamilton got ahead of him in the safety car. That's comical. That's terrible, and this is now Patton doing it again. It was pretty bad that in qualifying, where you could just see literally right in the middle of the racing line where he's slowing down. There's no idea what's coming behind him, and you see Lando Norris hit the brake pretty hard on a flying lap, which is I'm sure Charles was probably pretty angry when he pulled the car and saying, why on earth did you not tell me?
Yeah, and how many times is he going to stay? As you say, how many times is he going to put up with that? I mean, it's just a matter of time. Everybody knows he's a really, really good driver. Like, they are going to struggle to keep him, I think, if they carry on. That's and a three. I mean, it doesn't sound a lot, does it? A 3-place grid drop, but at Monaco, where it's impossible to overtake, that's as good as 10 points out the window. Basically, it's just
because he qualified, was it 4th or 3rd, and he ended up 6th or 7th.
Yeah.
Because then, I think it was 3rd, so maybe it was, but he did. Yeah, and also I think for Charles as well, the thing he finds really hard about Monaco is it's his home race, and he's had opportunities to win his home race, and he hasn't. And I think he probably felt, Monaco's, like a bit like Alonso. This is our opportunity to win a race here. We just need to have a good qualifying, and then even if he'd been on pole, imagine if he'd been on pole and he'd got that 3-place grid penalty, he would have been even more angrier, I think.
Yeah, he got it to 4th, and I think Where did he had a really good qualified on pole. Was that it? Was Baku, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, so there are definitely occasions where I think Charles just decides. I mean, he overdrives the car definitely, and there's no doubt about that this season. Like he's crashed it a couple of times by doing that. He's clearly trying to drive the car beyond its limits. And some weekends that'll work a treat, but I do think sort of this weekend it felt like he was being a bit more careful, which is not really what you want from a Charles Leclerc. Like what's the point? Like having him drive carefully because the car's not quite right and throw on all the kind of strategic problems and like race management issues. You do wonder how much longer he'll suffer it for.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. I think Charles's future at Ferrari hinges a lot on Lewis's future, because I think if Lewis quits this season at the end of the season, retires, then I've said this before. My prediction is that Toto will move quite quickly to get Charles, and I think Charles would entertain that idea and would probably move across. And as you said, people playing the Formula 1 manager game regularly move Charles to replace Lewis. I did that just today itself. But
Aston Martin are in the conversation as well. I think
to replace Alonso in a couple of years' time.
Well, either Alonso in a couple of years or Lance in one.
Interesting.
I mean, we talked about Aston. They're carrying a driver. You've got a world-class talent, proven race winner, previously a World Drivers' Championship competitor. Why would you not?
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see where the career of Charles goes, because I sadly think he could be one of the greatest Formula One world champions that's never won a world championship. Like, he's such a talented driver, and I think where his career is going at the moment, things just seem to be transpiring against him. He's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and will never get a proper opportunity to really win a world championship. And I think he'll go down along with Robert Kubica, who is also mentioned in our underrated driver episode, as someone that probably could deserve to win a world championship on sort of driver skill and talent. But from where it's going at the moment, I'm a bit worried for Charles. I think he could end up just drifting a bit and just be caught up in Ferrari and the many blunders that they seem to have every weekend.
Yeah.
So that brings our post-race discussion to an end. Let's come on to the predictions game. This is when we each get 3 drivers every week, and we have to predict their final race position, and we get points. And if you get it bang on, you get 0 points. Depending on how many positions out, you then gain points, and points are bad. We've been doing this for a couple of races now, and I've got a lovely lead. Remind me, Sam, what's my lead?
You are approximately 10 points ahead.
Nice. And the forfeit at the end of the season for the loser has to wear a Red Bull piece of clothing for the start of next season. So it's looking good for me. But Sam, do you want to recap our results and let me know? Because I don't know the outcome. I obviously know a couple of my drivers, but I want to see how it all adds up. Have I extended my winning streak, or have you claimed your maiden victory?
Okay, so Monaco Grand Prix predictions. So you had car number 44, Lewis Hamilton, and you predicted him to finish in 4th. And he finished in 4th.
Hey.
Nil point. Well done. Very good work. You had Alex Albon. You predicted him to finish in 12th.
No, I don't think he did.
Finished in 14th.
Okay.
So you're a couple out.
2.
And everyone's favourite drinking partner, Valtteri Bottas, you predicted to finish in 15th, and he finished in 11th. So that's 4 points. So for a total of 6.
Okay, that's not too bad. I'm reasonably happy with that. I thought, that's considering how it could have gone. I think that could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, strong, very strong. I had George Russell. I predicted him to finish 5th, and he finished in 5th.
Hey.
Nil point for me on that one. So yeah, we've absolutely. I mean, you couldn't tell if we had. You couldn't tell we had both. We both have Mercedes allegiances here, could you? We've got both drivers and got them nailed perfectly for the Monaco Grand Prix. I then had Max Verstappen, who I did have finishing 1st, but I changed to 2nd, thinking Charles Leclerc would win, and he did not. So I picked up a point there. And then I had Pierre Gasly. And I predicted him to finish 9th, and he predicted 7th. So I picked up 2 points. So I have won.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How does it
Finally.
feel? How does it
feels
feel?
good. I'm relieved more than thrilled. I didn't want a hat trick of losses at the start of a game I've invented would be quite depressing. So yeah, no, I'm pleased with that, and yeah, equaled our best total so far of
Very
three
good.
points across all three drivers. But for my Max Verstappen silliness, it would have been 2. But never mind, I'll take it. Take the win, and I've made up 3 points.
So what is it? So have I now got a 7-point lead?
I think you're about. Yeah, I think it's a 7-point gap now.
Okay.
So
Okay.
need a few more weeks like this to.
It can all change. It can all change very quickly. It just takes one DNF and someone's. I got a lot of points to make up. A bit like Checo has in the World Championship.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. All right. So moving on to Spain, Barcelona Grand Prix. So you drew first up number 12, Nico Hülkenberg.
Oh, flipping heck. Hasses are so hard to predict. I'm going to go 13th.
Okay, 13th. Unlucky number 13 for the Hulk. All right, next up you got number 17, and that is, lo and behold, the other Haas, Kevin Magnussen.
Oh, for goodness sake. This is... Oh, bloody hell. This is going to be hard. Where do I think Kevin Magnussen's going to go? If Kevin Magnussen's quick, he could be... I'm going to go 15th.
Okay.
Oh, this is not a good start to my luck is down already with who I'm getting. Please be someone in the top six. Not please not be Alex Albon.
You're all right. It is number 5, everyone's daughter's favorite boyfriend, George Russell.
Where's George going to finish? I think he's going to finish 4th.
Okay. What does your gut instinct tell you about Mercedes next weekend? Do you think they're going to be? Do you think they'll be within half a tenth of Red Bull?
No.
Okay.
No. I think a good weekend for Mercedes is if it's a Red Bull 1-2, if they can nudge Alonso out of the podium. I think that's a really good weekend for Mercedes. And I think you're right. It's a great circuit for testing a car. So they'll get a lot of data from testing it properly on a proper circuit. And so, I think they should hopefully learn a lot. And we will get to truly see how good this car is and how different it is. I mean, I would almost love it if they could run, if Lewis could run the side pod car and George could run the no side pod car, and then you could see the comparison over a lap. But we will never see that. But I'm hoping, the optimist in me is hoping that this is a sort of the fight to Aston starts now, and they can start nudging Fernando off the podium.
All right. So my first one, I got number 16, which is Yuki Tsunoda.
Ooh, okay.
I have absolutely no idea. I'll have a stab at 14th, I think, for Yuki.
Ooh, that's quite low.
Oh, is the AlphaTauri going to be any good in Barcelona? I don't know. I've no idea anymore. I mean, this is what I mean. These teams, like the lower midfield to bottom half teams, it is really difficult.
Yeah.
Because as you said last pod, I think you could finish anywhere between like 10th and last. I then got number 8, which is Latifi winner from this week, Lance Stroll.
Oh, hey. Is he going to finally get a podium?
No, he's not. I am going to back him to finish in the points, though. So I'm going to go for Lance Stroll to finish in 7th.
Very, very respectable. That's quite a safe one, I think, because he could finish anywhere between 10th and...
Yeah.
I mean, if he has a weekend like this weekend, that could come back to haunt you, but...
I feel like it's low risk at Barcelona, surely. Like, there's not generally not action-packed, not loads of instants.
No.
A relatively, like a circuit that's not super difficult to drive. And they've removed that really tricky chicane right at the end, haven't they? The last corner before the straight. So that helps. I think that will help overtaking. The Aston Martin's a fast car. He'll finish in the points. And speaking of Aston Martin, I got Fernando Alonso.
Are you predicting a win? Are you predicting a win?
See, when you said he's in garage 33, I suddenly then thought, oh God, should I? No, I'm not. I think Alonso will finish 3rd again this season. I think it'll be a Red Bull 1-2, unfortunately.
That's quite a boring prediction, but you're playing it safe.
I know. Well, I've got a deficit to make up.
Yeah, I think if you were leading, you would have gone for the first. I think going for the romantic, hometown win, as you did with Charles in Monaco, has
Yeah.
hurt you. So I think you're playing the long game by trying to win as many points as possible.
Yeah, if I can build up a nice little gap, maybe I'll start chucking in a few road predictions here and there. But I don't know. I mean, it's not one of the ones where you fancy a kind of a carnage race, right? Where
No.
I mean, unless Max and Checo come together, which is quite possible. I mean, you never know. But I don't know.
There's been crashes going into that first corner on that long straight before.
Yeah.
And also, I was there last year when Charles was winning. Looked like he had it nailed, and then has engine problems, and then Max wins. So it only takes something like that. And not Red Bull haven't changed any engines or parts yet, have they? So could reliability become a thing? We don't know.
Maybe, although I think all the teams are none of them will be pleased to have missed Imola, but it takes a bit of the pressure off the engine quota, doesn't it? It's just one less race that the engines have to be put through. So,
and who are you predicting for the win then? Max?
Yes, obviously, of course. Yeah,
I'm gonna, because we obviously don't have any points for getting the winner right. I'm gonna predict Mr. Alonso is gonna do it.
Really? Wow.
I think so.
Okay.
I'm just picturing the scenes. I think it'll be amazing scene to see him win his home race. And I think, I'm sure Fernando can do something.
Do you think he'll win it on in a normal race, like pace kind of way, or do you think something will have to happen to Max?
Yes, I think something will have to happen to Max. That, as we said, Max is looking pretty strong. It's going to take a miracle for him not to win races. I think that this could be it this weekend. And I think he could beat Checo if it came for the win.
Wow. Okay. Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
I will be. I'll be tuning in. Look forward to it.
Yeah, it should be very good.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thanks for joining us. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you enjoyed it, please do share it with a friend. Hopefully they enjoy the pod more than Lance Stroll obviously enjoyed bobsleighing his way from corner to corner as it poured with rain on Sunday. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, please do. We are at Lights Out Lads, and on Instagram we are at the Lights Out Pod. Will, viva la España!
Yes, we're off to Barcelona. I'm intrigued to see what upgrades we will have. We'll get to see the true potential of the Mercedes, and we could potentially see our very own anti-hero, Mr. Fernando Alonso, getting his first win at home. So yeah, lots to look forward to. And join us next week for another post-race discussion. That's all from us. All the best, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.